Welcome back to Daily Dose of Knowledge. If you're new here, subscribe and stay. Today we are going somewhere most channels are afraid to go. We are going to understand the torturer. Not excuse them, not defend them, understand them. Because understanding how an ordinary human being becomes capable of inflicting deliberate suffering on another human being is one of the most important psychological questions there is. And the answer is going to disturb you. Not because it is strange. Because it is not. Let's start with a question that seems simple, but isn't. What separates you from a torturer? Most people answer immediately. Character, morality, empathy, decency. And they are probably right about themselves. But they are dangerously wrong about the gap. Because the research, decades of it, tells us something most people are deeply unwilling to accept. The majority of people who have committed acts of torture in documented history were not psychopaths. They were not born cruel. They did not enjoy suffering as children. They were ordinary, teachers, fathers, neighbors, people who loved their families and helped their communities. And then circumstances arranged themselves in a particular way. And they became capable of things that should have been impossible. This is the finding that haunts researchers in this field. Not the monsters. The ordinary people. The first and most foundational psychological mechanism is dehumanization. Before a person can torture another person, they must first stop seeing them as fully human. This is not metaphorical. It is neurological. Brain imaging studies show that when people are shown photographs of individuals from groups, they have been conditioned to view negatively. The medial prefrontal cortex shows reduced activation. This is the region of the brain associated with thinking about other people, as having inner lives, as being subjects rather than objects. When it goes quiet, the psychological barrier to harming that person goes with it. Dehumanization is the prerequisite. Without it, torture is psychologically almost impossible for a normal person. With it, the victim is no longer a person in the perpetrator's mind. They are a problem, an enemy, a thing. And you can do things to things that you cannot do to people. History has understood this instinctively, even before neuroscience confirmed it. Every systematic program of torture in history has been preceded by systematic dehumanization. Nazi propaganda depicted Jewish people as rats and vermin for years before the camps. Rwandan radio called Tutsi people cockroaches for months before the genocide. During the Vietnam War, American soldiers were given training that referred to Vietnamese people by dehumanizing slurs before they were deployed. This is not coincidence. It is a deliberate psychological preparation. Because those in power understood intuitively what neuroscience would later confirm. You have to turn off a person's humanity in the perpetrator's mind before you can reliably get ordinary people to harm them. The second mechanism is obedience to authority. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram designed an experiment that would become one of the most disturbing in scientific history. Participants were told they were taking part in a study on learning and memory. They were asked to administer electric shocks to another person, actually an actor, whenever they gave a wrong answer. The shocks increased in intensity with each wrong answer. The labels on the shock machine ranged from slight shock all the way to danger, severe shock, and finally XX. The actor screamed, begged to be released, complained of a heart condition, eventually went silent. 65% of participants administered the maximum shock. Not because they were cruel. Because an authority figure in a white coat told them to continue. And they obeyed. Milgram concluded that the capacity for atrocity does not require malevolence. It requires authority and a structure that distributes moral responsibility away from the individual. When someone above you gives the order, the psychological weight of the act shifts upward. You are just following instructions. You are just doing your job. The responsibility belongs to the person who gave the command. This moral diffusion is one of the most powerful forces enabling organized torture. It is why torture is rarely the act of lone sadists. It is almost always institutional, systematic, ordered from above and carried out by people who have been given permission to stop feeling responsible. The third mechanism is moral disengagement, a concept developed by psychologist Bandura. Moral disengagement is the process by which a person deactivates their own internal moral standards to perform actions they would otherwise find unacceptable. Bandura identified 8 specific mechanisms people use to do this. Moral justification. Reframing the harmful act as serving a higher purpose. We are getting information to save lives. We are protecting our country. The suffering we cause is necessary. Euphemistic labeling. Using sanitized language to reduce the psychological weight of what is happening. Enhanced interrogation instead of torture. Collateral damage instead of killing civilians. Advantageous comparison. Comparing the act to something worse. What we are doing is nothing compared to what they did to us. Displacement of responsibility. As in Milgram's experiments, attributing the act to orders from above. Diffusion of responsibility. In group torture settings, the presence of others dilutes individual accountability. Everyone is doing it. No single person feels fully responsible. Dehumanization of the victim, as already discussed. Attribution of blame. The victim deserved it. They are the real criminal here. And finally, disregard or distortion of consequences. Simply not allowing yourself to fully process what you are doing to another person. These 8 mechanisms do not operate separately. In a torture setting, they operate simultaneously, each one reinforcing the others, building a psychological architecture that makes the unthinkable not just possible but feel justified. Now let's talk about a real case. In 2004, the Abu Ghraib prison scandal broke publicly when photographs emerged showing American military personnel torturing and humiliating Iraqi detainees. The initial public response was to frame the perpetrators as bad apples, rogue individuals, monsters who did not represent the institution. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, who had conducted his own landmark Stanford prison experiment in 1971, looked at the evidence and concluded something very different. These were not bad apples. They were ordinary people put into a bad barrel. The Stanford prison experiment had shown this years earlier. Zimbardo randomly assigned college students to be either guards or prisoners in a simulated prison. Within days, the guards were psychologically transformed. They were humiliating prisoners, forcing stress positions, conducting sadistic exercises in the middle of the night. These were psychologically normal college students. 6 days earlier, they had been strangers. The situation did it, not their character. This is what Zimbardo called the Lucifer effect, the transformation of good people into perpetrators of evil through the power of situation, system, and authority. The Abu Ghraib guards were sleep-deprived, operating under enormous stress, given implicit and explicit permission from authority figures, surrounded by peers doing the same things, and systematically told that the detainees were dangerous enemy combatants who deserved no consideration. Every psychological mechanism we have discussed was present simultaneously. Dehumanization, authority, moral disengagement, diffusion of responsibility. And ordinary people became capable of things that in any other context would have been unthinkable to them. Now let's go to the part of this topic that almost nobody discusses. What happens inside the torturer? Because the torturer is not a stone. They are a human being doing something to another human being. And that leaves marks. Researchers who have interviewed former torturers, including studies conducted after the collapse of authoritarian regimes in Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Africa, find a remarkably consistent psychological portrait. Most describe significant dissociation during the acts themselves. A splitting of consciousness where part of them performed the actions while another part retreated and did not fully witness what they were doing. Many describe a gradual numbing. The first time was the hardest, then it became easier, then it became routine. And that normalization itself became a source of later horror when the context changed, and they could see clearly again what they had normalized. Many describe intrusive memories, nightmares, and hypervigilance for years afterward. Classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And many, and this is the finding that hits hardest, describe having themselves been victims of violence, abuse, or systematic dehumanization before they became perpetrators. Studies of military torturers across multiple countries and conflicts consistently show elevated rates of prior trauma, childhood abuse, and exposure to violence. The torturer was often first tortured, not always physically, sometimes psychologically. Dehumanized before they learned to dehumanize. Made to feel powerless before they were given power over someone else's body. This does not create sympathy that overrides accountability. But it creates understanding that changes the question. The question is no longer just, how did this person become a monster? The question becomes, what does a society, an institution, a family do to a person to prepare them for this? And what does it then do to activate it? Because the torturer does not appear from nowhere. They are made. By systems, by trauma, by ideology, by authority, by the slow erosion of another person's humanity in their eyes. Understanding that is not comfort. It is a warning. The capacity for this is not located in a small population of defective people. It is distributed across human psychology. It requires the right conditions to emerge. And the most important work any society can do is refuse to create those conditions. That is your daily dose of knowledge for today. Drop a comment and tell me, which of these psychological mechanisms surprised you the most? Share this with someone who thinks cruelty is always the product of monsters. Subscribe because we are just getting started. I'll see you in the next one.